Okay. Let's see, I think we may have discussed this. I just haven't read it yet. So yeah, we did discuss this, like only one factor of, or we were only measuring one factor of the CCD.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I will blue it because I want to go over it again at some point. All right. So, okay. So this was measuring cognitive concepts, and then now it's got a separate one for measuring evaluative concepts.
Yep.
In regard to concepts pertaining to evaluation, value, emotion, feeling, desire, the hierarchy involved is of a different kind and requires entirely different type of measurement.
Yeah.
She's not, but she's still referring to content and intensity, right?
I think so.
It's type applicable, maybe teleological measurement.
Let's see, let me find the context. This is the chapter 4, I think.
Yeah, so she's talking about concepts of consciousness, and initially talks about measuring in regards to concepts pertaining to cognition, thought, observation, reasoning. That was the first one. And now she's going in regard to concepts pertaining to evaluation, value, emotion, feeling, desire, the hierarchy. What is the hierarchy? The hierarchy involved is of a different.
These are terms that scope and hierarchy connection indicate more.
I'm not too sure what she means by the hierarchy there.
Well, the hierarchy is just how the hierarchy of concepts.
Oh, okay. Right.
I'm just reading this.
But what does that have to do with the hierarchy involved? I'm not like.
Well, this is how we organize the concepts. I mean, concepts of method are concepts of like emotions, a type of conscious activity.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's a type of content of consciousness, just that hierarchy.
Okay, so teleological
method. I mean, it's just the particular type of measurement used.
Right.
I mean, it's not omitting what you're specifying the way it's being measured.
But it's not a unit anymore, right? Because she says measurement is identification of a relationship, a quantitative relationship.
The measurements are not units. The units are the things you're referring to.
What do you mean the units are the thing I'm referring to?
The units are what you refer to. It's the thing that has been integrated or separated. I mean, the units, the members of the group are the unit.
Right.
And the measurements are not they're how you determine what the unit is, but they aren't themselves a unit.
But when you're doing quantitative measurement, what did you call it? Ordinal? Then you do have a standard that is a unit.
Well, it's still quantitative. It's a type of quantitative measurement.
Okay.
Cardinal measurement's one type and ordinal's another. It's still quantitative. It's just not precise numbers.
Got it.
They're relationals rather than a strict number.
So the standard serves to establish a graded relationship of means to ends. And so the standard is still considered the unit, right? That's how it works?
Well, the standard measurement is not a unit. It's just the way you measure what is a unit. When you're measuring the things with that.
Okay. I'm still not 100% clear on that, but that's fine.
Well, I mean, the measurement is not the thing. I mean, like the ruler isn't, the length of something isn't, you could say the unit a book is a unit of the group book. Like you have an individual book is the unit, and you can measure it with a ruler. I mean, the measurement is not the the unit. It's the way you're measuring the
Right.
unit.
Right. Okay, so the teleological measurement is more, does this help or hinder this specific thing I'm using to measure whatever it is I'm measuring? And then does it help or hinder more than other things? Is that sort of how it works with cardinal?
Teleological with cardinal.
Is it ordinal or cardinal? I forget. I got to write this down.
Ordinal as in ordered.
Ordinal. Okay.
As in order. So when you're evaluating something, you're measuring to some standard of purpose or goal. Evaluation is related to a goal. So you can measure the things ordinally in terms of how it helps you attain a goal. I mean, you could rank, you could rank a coffee cup as in some relationship to, your favorite book. I mean, there's a relationship between those. Like you can rank one higher than the other. They help you attain that particular goal better or worse than another.
So with the teleological measurement, you're ranking things ordinally, and the way you rank them is simply relative to each other. There's no, like,
relative to the final goal.
Yeah, but the way you determine whether it's more or less relative to the final goal is by looking at the different things you're trying to measure, right? Like,
yeah, you
let's
compare
say
the things to each other.
Right. So there's no like okay, I'm getting it. So let's say you've got one thing you can work on for the day, and your teleological measurement is being productive. Then in that case, that is of highest teleological rank. But if you have 5 possible things to do for the day, then suddenly you can establish because you have 5 different things, now one can be more than the other relative to the goal. Did I get that right? So it depends on your options.
Right. And that's probably almost could show why you need a code of ethics. Like if you only had like 5 choices your whole life, and it's like, yeah, you probably don't need a complicated science. But since there are so many options and overlaying options and overlapping options, that you need a complex way to measure that. You need to figure out how to order these things in a very complex way, because obviously you'll at one level, yeah, productivity is important. You could rank things according to productivity, but productivity itself too serves another purpose, which is your life. So how do you rank something in terms of, say, what has to do with honesty versus what has to do with productivity? And it gets really complicated from there, of course.
When it says that makes sense to me. When it says okay, so measurement is an identification of a relationship, so that would apply to a teleological measurement. And then
Yes.
a quantitative relationship established by means of a standard that serves as a unit. Does that still apply to teleological measurement? Like, is the whatever within the teleological measurement, what do you call ends? Is that there's an ends and the means, right? Is that what you? So
Usually something like that. At least there's always a goal, and you could subdivide you could have sub goals within there, or means. It really depends on how you conceptualize it. But yes, if there's a goal, there's usually a means to the goal, and you can rank it. Think of it that way too.
And is the end considered, if we're going by this definition, quantitative relationship established by means of a standard that serves as a unit, is the ends a standard that serves as a unit, or does this thing not apply? This whole little.
A unit is just the individual instances of a concept. That's all it is. It's not. Don't confuse units of measure with units in the sense of units of
Yeah,
a
you
concept.
said, I remember you saying that before. I guess I'm confused by it. So
Yeah, you're almost conflating it. Like, yeah, there are units of measure, but we're not talking about units of measure when we're talking about units of a concept. They're individual, like a unit of measure, you could say it's one individual aspect of the measurement, and that's why I use the same word, but we're referring to different things. You're not referring to the thing, it's just the standard of measure is separate from the units of the thing that is measured. I mean, they're separate.
but so uh is the end of the teleology, I don't know if I'm using the words correctly there, is that an aspect of the measurement?
Is an aspect of the measurement.
Yeah, as you've said, it's not, you said don't confuse the standard that serves as a unit with the actual units. But then in the
not
case
the
of
standard that serves as a unit. Like measurements have units, but
yeah,
that's a different sense of the word. We're referring to different things. When I say unit, I'm referring to instances of a concept. It's not units of measure, that's something else.
okay. All right. And then yeah, but maybe we'll come back to this. I don't want to. Maybe I won't spend too long on it. I'm not that. There's something here that I'm not clear on, but I'll think some on myself, and then we can come back.
Well, I'll just say the goal. Yeah, that's part of the measurement. You have to know what the goal is to know what you're measuring. Like you have a goal, and you have the measurements. Wait, just avoid the word unit. Maybe that should help you.
But isn't that part of the definition? I'm just trying to relate the definition of measurement in general to a teleological measurement, because I'm not. I get that it's a rank, but then I'm not really clear on like what the unit is for like comparing. Is this more or less than
your question is more like what's the conceptual common denominator? What's the measurement you're using?
Okay.
What is the standard you're using? Like, yeah, it's teleological, but what is it? Well, it might be in terms of pleasure. For example, you could say, what's the pleasure rating? Like, is it a lot of pleasure or a little pleasure? That's one way to rank things. Or does it make you feel happy or less happy? Your measure, the thing in common could be anything like that. It could be pleasure, it could be fulfillment of duty, it could be like whatever the standard is would be the way it's teleological, like in relation to something else or in relation to a goal. Or the goal might be to, I don't know, to what extent you are able to have children. Like you'll rank things according to like ability to have kids. Like what will help you have kids, what will hinder you from having kids, or whatever the goal is. You use some measure like that.
Okay. Yes, that's correct. We just answered that in the discussion.
So your question was more like, what is the CCD? That's really more what you're asking.
Yeah, or right. What's the commensurable characteristic? Yeah.
Yes. The CCD is the commensurable characteristic. They're the same thing. They're synonyms.
Yes, I need to go through examples to make this clear, this teleological thing. This is something Aristotle did, right?
Teleological is really an Aristotelian thing. That's his way of thinking about a lot of things.
Right.
Like he thought about values in terms of that.
That's really
what he talked about. Like ecomachine ethics usually he's talking about like in relation to what you serve to some end, some purpose. That's how he thinks of ethics usually.
I heard that he had a kind of selfish ethics. I didn't know that.
It's arguable. It's not obvious. It's not incompatible with egoism, but you could argue it depending on. There's arguments for and against that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a good question right now, but how, like, okay, so I understand you can say, you can look at certain things relative to a specific teleological goal, if you can say that. And and you can say this helps me go towards it or this doesn't. But how do you determine how much it helps you go towards it if you've got no, I think it's like, let's say you've got three things. Is there some kind of abstract way of thinking about how you determine how much each thing helps you get towards the end? Or is this just totally contextual in that case?
I guess contextual in terms of like, what is your theory of how these things work? Like, what is your theory of value? What is your theory about what brings you to an end or not? I mean, within objectivism, we would look at, say, the health of your body, for example. But maybe certain other thinkers might, if they think a soul exists, the body is considered in a totally different way.
Okay.
Like if there's an afterlife, well, that changes a lot.
Yeah. All right. This is confusing to me. I'm going to have to come back and get really clear on it. All right. So let's see what this is about.
A lot of that's just, you learn over time the way to measure. Like you learn what the correct and wrong way is. Like you just learn. Like the way you learn math. I mean, at first there's different ways you can add 2 + 2. I mean, there's easy ways, but the more complex math you get, you realize it's not necessarily as obvious as it seems.
Yeah. Well, this might change the way I think about feelings too. I don't know if I guess I rank them, but I don't know. I want to think about that one more. Okay. A moral code. Let's see what my questions are here. Okay, this is probably one about hierarchy of values. So it's saying, it's talking about teleological measurement again, and relative to a moral code.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a hierarchy of values. How does a hierarchy of values, is that different teleologies, or like what do you call the goal in no.
It's the same thing. Like the ordinal measurements that you create, what you end up with is a hierarchy of values. Like that ranking create, that's the hierarchy.
Okay.
It's the same thing. The goal is the same thing as like the goal of the hierarchy. It's the same thing.
In order of their importance. So he created a hierarchy of values, and that's in order of their importance. And all actions are guided by a process so relative to this hierarchy. Okay.
Then you fit more things into it over time.
Fit more things into it over time? What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, you could have a hierarchy, and then you say discover something new, and like, I'm going to stuff that somewhere else.
Integrate that into the hierarchy. Yeah.
Yeah, you just stuff it in somewhere, fit it in.
All right, cool. I like the way you said that. Louis walks around stuffing things into his hierarchy of values. Okay. Against an enormous context, it consists of establishing the relationship of a given choice to all other possible choices.
Yep.
So is time then the only, okay, what does this mean? So does that mean time is the only, what is time? Is that a measure? Is that what aspect is time of the teleology? Like time spent on each thing in the hierarchy? Is that
that could be one way to measure it too.
Okay, so there are multiple measurements, you're thinking.
Yeah, the more complex it gets, the more measurements you need to take into consideration. Like you have many measures make up the measurement of the ordinal measurements. Like you put many together to get one other number. I don't know, like imagine you're just a weird way of thinking, like 5 pleasure points and 3 happiness points and
sounds like
5 time points, and you add them together and you get the value points. And that's just a simple way to put it. Like you have a lot of measures, you add them up, you get a new measure.
But how can you sum up different measurements? So like, you're talking about time and pleasure, and they're all different. And how do you sum up different
commensurability? But that's where it gets difficult. Like You have to know enough about the concept and how are they related? Are they related enough to put them together? Are they incommensurable? If they're not commensurable, it doesn't matter because then you can't even add them together. Things like that.
Okay, well, give me like, let's think of a concrete example then. So like, let's say I can do 3 things for the day, and one of them is really, really important, but it's going to take me 2 days. And one is not as important, but it will take me 60 minutes. Like, how do you then evaluate? Okay, so you've got time and you've got urgency, and they're not commensurable measurements. So then how do you, in a teleological measurement, sum them?
Um,
Like on instinct, I'll just say I go to the thing that takes the least amount of time. I couldn't tell you. I just know, okay, well, this other thing's going to take me 2 days anyway. So I might as well just get out one thing out of the way as part of but I don't know why. That's because it
I
makes sense,
wouldn't
but that's all I
say
could say.
they're incommensurable. I don't think I'd say that. I think you'd have to first think about how could you compare them? How could they be related to each other? Well, got time itself. You could say one, you can measure in terms of how many days it takes to do something. That's one way to measure them. I mean, they're related in that way. And you can relate them both in terms of how much pleasure it might give you. That's commensurable for them. Those are things in common. The only thing that's hard to measure is that one gives a little pleasure and done really quickly. One might give a lot of pleasure, but it takes a long time to do. So it's a hard way to calculate. How do you rate, say, taking 2 days but giving a lot of pleasure versus getting a little pleasure but taking, I don't know, 30 minutes? It's difficult to rate, but you can say rate in terms of degree of pleasure, or you could measure in terms of the degree that all at once you get at something better. Or you might say you can rate them in terms of, you could rate them both in terms of value on the one hand, but then you can also consider in terms of speed. If you need to do something quickly, you might say that's the way you need to make the decision right now. You do what's quick rather than what's, but in the end, you know that, say, the 2 hour thing is more, the 2 day thing is more important. That everything should at least not detract from that. So it'd be complicated, of course. How do you rate them exactly? What's better? But usually you can do it in terms of, say, how do you can do them both, and how do you do one without harming the other? Because on some level you want to do both. So if you can do both, that's great. Otherwise, you try to fit them both in. But you can measure it in terms of just to what degree it will get you closer to your goal of life.
Yeah, I still don't know how you'd, like, okay, so you've got a hierarchy. Maybe this is still kind of floating because I'm not clear on the hierarchy of values. Okay. Do you reckon there's are there good examples on this kind of thing where I can find? Because it'd be pretty cool to think about, like, what should I do with my time relative to I don't know how to think about that, to be honest.
Well,
like, I know, okay, I want this, I'll go
thing?
for that, but it's all just that
Can you give more concrete?
Well, I'm trying. It's just hard for me to think of something.
Write a novel could be one, because that takes a long time, for sure. And maybe, I don't know, cleaning your room. How do those work for you? As an example.
Yeah, let's just go with that. Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. Yeah.
Okay, so how do we determine which is more important? I mean, of course, you want to say the book's more important, but
yeah, the book
why
is
it more important?
In the hierarchy of values. The book is more important. Why is it more important? Isn't that just an emotional thing? Like, it means more. You can, okay, maybe it's not just emotional. It's based on something. So, let's assume it sells. Maybe it will generate some income.
Okay.
It'll give you a lot of pleasure and pride, whereas cleaning a room will give you less pride. I couldn't tell you why. I just know it would. but yeah, that less pride from one, more pride from one, less from the other, but still pride for both.
Yeah. I mean, you can start thinking in those terms. I mean, you're right. It doesn't necessarily matter if they're right or wrong values, at least insofar as you're making a hierarchy. How do you make the decision? I mean, it's valid to do these things, I think, the way you're doing it. You might not know why, but that can come in later. Right now, we're just measuring them, we're just comparing them.
Yeah.
We're not really worried yet about what the correct value is. That can come in later. And
Yeah.
this way,
So
you're just looking at them.
what about what I said about pride? Like, let's just go with it's going to take me the whole day to clean the room. That way, or the whole day I can dedicate to writing, or the whole day I can clean the room.
Yeah.
I don't know. See, I on those kind of, I actually don't have a method. I'll just go by feeling when I have those kind of things.
Right. So we might want to think of, if you want to be more conceptualize it better than just going on feeling, you might want to consider um, to what extent does your messy room affect your writing, or to what extent does not finishing your book affect your messy room? It probably doesn't. Your
Well,
book
you're not
probably
going to
doesn't
finish the book
affect.
in a day, though. You're not going to finish the book in a day. So,
Right, that too. So you could consider that. I mean, would the messy room somehow interfere with that? I mean, that's one thing you consider. Does it get in the way of pursuing that value,
no,
or does one get in the way of the other?
no.
I
Unless
mean,
you write the book, it's going to get in the right way of the messy room.
what I mean is writing the messy room could, or taking care of the messy room. I mean, clearly, does having a messy room affect your writing? To me, it could. For example, like a messy
Right.
room is distracting and bothersome and gets in the way of writing the book. So that's an issue I would consider. What it hinders it in some way, and having an unwritten book also might make it hard to clean my room. But it's quick to clean my room as compared to, say, I mean, it's going to always be on my mind if I'm cleaning my room that I want to write the book, but it's going to take me, like, I don't know, 2 months to write it. It's going to be on my mind every day. So you can try to compare it that way too. Like, how much does it impact your thinking? You might consider, does not cleaning your room, does cleaning your room actually bring you closer to writing that book? I mean, you can think of it, how does one help you attain the other? Is it subordinate to the book? Like, you could think of it like, is it just a means? Is cleaning the room just a means to write the book? I mean, if it's merely a means, you might rate it as less important.
Right. This is it's complicated because like you could also say, well, I'll clean some of my room,
Yeah.
just enough, and then the rest of the day I will write my book. And I actually think this is a good area for me to explore because I do not have a way of doing this. I will always just go by random feelings for the most part. Like there's some thinking, it's not that there's none, like, but it's very, very vague. It's like, oh, I'll just do this. And I might get into non-purposed, like non-really strongly purposed action or whatever. So this is pretty
Yeah.
interesting. But it seems like everything has its own, all these different considerations, no matter what you're pursuing. And it seems like there's no, uh, like you're talking about will um, not cleaning your room affect writing your book. And so that's that example. And what about like, should I keep working today or should I go socialize for an hour? Like, I don't know how you make the calculation of like, well, I should have some socialization because, you know, it's my value, but I could also socialize at the end of the week. Like, though, I don't even know how you consciously go through the only way I know is feeling, but
Yeah, feeling
uh,
could be valid there. I mean, that could be a valid way to use emotion. That once you create the hierarchy, sometimes it is enough merely to go on the feeling. You could analyze it later if you're having problems. Like, do you have motivation problems? Are you trying to write a book but you can't get yourself to do it? Are you doing just cleaning chores as an escape, or are you using it actually? You actually need to. Or if you have no problem, it's probably fine. Like, it's simple enough for me to see, like, cleaning my room really quick, not a problem. Spend the rest of the day writing, not a problem. I mean, that's enough of the hierarchy for me. Like, the book is more important, and I want to be in a good state of mind. So I clean my room, get the simple things done, then have all the time in the world I need for the big things. And that's usually enough for me. Like, I don't really need to measure more precisely than that because it
Yeah.
works well. And sometimes that is enough. And if it's not working for you, then you might want to take it apart further. Like, well, I see that strategy is not working for me. I'm still not getting it done. What can I do? What can I reorganize my hierarchy of values? Am I rating something differently in a bad way? Is there a better way to order things? That's what you can do.
So in the case of a clean room and writing a book is a higher value and a clean room is a lower value. But that doesn't mean that you can write a book in a non-clean room. Anyway, this whole thing is this hierarchy of values and teleological measurement it's like, I think it's messy. Like, going back to the example that I gave with, like, do you go out and socialize tonight or keep working an extra 2 hours? Like, um, the considerations there are different from the considerations you have when you're deciding whether to clean a room or write a book, right? And so everything has its own, I don't know if they're measurements or whatever, but am I thinking about it right? It's just everything has its own measurement relative to the hierarchy.
But each instance will have a specific value, a specific measurement. The only thing about the teleology, the measurement overall, is that you've omitted the particular measurements and just recognize that there is a measurement. But if you're trying to identify the measurement for the value in question, that's when it can be, yeah, each thing has its own value, has its own measure. In the same way that each instance of a dog has its own shape. They're all a little different. Each particular dog has its own particular shape and different needs, but they still belong to the category dog.
Right. And time is only one way to measure a teleology. Like, you can have a hierarchy of values and something at the top, but you spend way less time on it than something in the middle. Is that
Yeah, or at least Rand says time is more relevant when we get into moral or spiritual values. Certain measurements become more relevant the more abstract it is. Like, you're trying to determine what's more important, socializing with my friends or time with my family. That's much more difficult than, do I want to have coffee or do I want to have ice cream? I mean, clearly one's easier to measure than the other.
right, because there's more considerations in the former, like with family or friends. You've got to consider that I don't even know but that's what seems to make it so impossible for me. I do this all by feeling, right? But like, what you to break down every single time you're making a decision, you'd have to break down all the possible considerations to make the decision. That would seem like
Right.
that. Otherwise, you're
And
just acting on whim, because I don't know the sources of my feelings, a lot of them. So
I don't think it's wrong to use emotion there. I think it's perfectly fine.
But I mean, it would be. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I think it is, if you don't know the source of the feelings. Like, it would be so much better to be really clear about why you're doing something than if you just go like, yes. I kind of think vaguely that this is better and it seems to work, because then that's your habitual way of acting for a lot of your values. And it's the issue is that this thing is really interesting, because it's saying, from what I gather, this is saying there's a specific way to consciously organize everything you value and then act in accordance with that in the most appropriate way possible. Honestly, it seems like an insanely difficult thing to do, given all the considerations for each different thing. But if you can do it, that would be amazing if that's possible. So
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right that, I mean, maybe deciding these things is exceedingly complex and it's hard to even get a sure answer because you almost need to spend days upon days to figure it out. And obviously, you don't have days upon days to figure out who you want to spend time with that day. And clearly, that's an issue here. I think that's the biggest issue. And on some level, yes, there will be many, many decisions in your life that will be very limited knowledge. You can't use very much. You do what you can as best you can. And that's about it. I mean, Rand is just sitting out here. You can do it. This is how you do it. And that's that. I mean, whether or not how much time you need is a different question, I think. How how quickly can you do all this? How much of it can you do? Do you only have time for some of it? Some of these measurements? That's really what it comes down to, I think. Yeah, this is how you do it, but she's not saying you will always have the time to do all this. There are some limitations with time and all that.
Yeah, although that's true, but I do wonder if you're very clear on the concept and different considerations you might have in different situations. If not, you'd be able to do it fairly quickly. And also on validated feelings, meaning like, yeah, your feelings are guiding you, but because you're so well, you've thought it out before so much more, then
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, that's all speculation because I don't understand this enough.
Yeah, I think that's as far as we can go with this part of ITO. Anyway, as far as the measuring the values, because like anything else, I think is just getting really much more in depth. I mean, this is
Yeah.
just setting out what's the general sketch of how you can do it. I mean,
Well,
it's the introduction after all.
yeah. That, I know. Well, I guess it interests me. So where do I go to? How do I integrate this kind of thinking about teleologies and hierarchy of values really well? Like,
Usually, like risk taking, theories of risk, theories of decision making within psychology is really, I think, where it gets down to the nitty gritty.
right. Something, I wonder if it's in here. Okay. Let me continue asking you about this teleology thing a little bit more.
Sure.
So with emotions, the teleology part of the measurement is the intensity of the emotion, right? So like if you feel very strongly about this one thing, it means more to you than another thing. Am I right on that?
Let me find where you're highlighted.
I
Highlight where you're
just
looking at. There.
yeah, I'd like to explore this. This is interesting because it's
Supposed to begin with the delay being relevant.
is it a method teleology?
I wouldn't say it's a method. I mean, teleological measurement is what we're talking about. Measurements about teleology, measuring teleology, which is measuring evaluative concepts. Those use teleological measurements. And using those type of measurements, how do you measure emotions? You can maybe rate things in terms of how sad something makes you feel, how angry something makes you feel, or emotions trying to evaluate like a response of good or bad. Your emotions do that. I mean, that's what Rand argues. Like it's a immediate response to how something serves or doesn't serve your life. So you're ranking things according to some end, which might be, your life. But they're immediate, and that's the difference. I mean, the content is different. This is how you measure the intensity. I think your intensity probably has to do something to do with this, but the content would be how you differentiate it from, say, value as a concept.
Okay, I want to come back to this at some point. This is pretty interesting. I didn't realize that how deep this was, and like how many implications it has.
Yeah.
Um, and so Aristotle writes a lot about this, yeah.
Hierarchy.
Or like thinking teleologically. I don't know. There's probably
Teleologically, yes.
there's
That way
probably
you
heaps of
framed it.
self-help books as well that like I bet, and I don't know if there are many that like are very rigorous in their thinking, so you can
It's primarily
universally.
just an Aristotelian thing.
Okay.
I mean, that's usually comes from his thinking. Things have a nature and they tend to act towards the end of their nature. That's how he kind of framed it. Everything acts towards its nature and its purpose.
Okay. So this is about measuring love.
Mm-hmm.
And this is so there's something that's confusing here, like the intensity of the emotion tells you it's higher in your hierarchy of values, but not necessarily your consciously held values, right? So the intensity of an emotion measures how much you value something, doesn't it? Or disvalue something.
Not necessarily. I mean, for certain times, yes. I mean, the intensity could just be, like I said, the intensity of pleasure something gives, which might not have necessarily anything to do with it's good for you or anything like that. I mean, like sugar makes you, like cocaine can make you feel really great. There's a lot of pleasure with it, but
That's
in
more of a
itself,
sensation than an emotion.
right? That's what I mean. But it's still the intensity that the sensation of that could be, or like you could say it brings pleasure. Like, yes, there's a sensation of it, but it actually really gives you a psychological pleasure. It's not just a sensation, but like psychologically you have pleasure, and you could rate it that way. But
let's go to the intensity of an emotion then.
okay.
What is that?
Well,
Because I'm putting aside cocaine or like outside sensory influences. Like,
okay, just in its.
What is that? Is that a hierarchy of values that's subconscious? Like we can have both a subconscious and a implicit subconscious. Okay.
Because if emotions are subconscious and they do evaluate things, then yeah, there is some sort of at least implicit hierarchy there. There's got to be some range in intensity and ranking even if they work that way. That's
So
what would happen.
We have an implicit and explicit hierarchy of values then.
I only said implicit because you might not consciously recognize it. It's there, but you might not recognize it.
Right.
That's all I meant. Implicit just meaning it's there, but just not recognized.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So, I mean, if you ideally you've got an explicit one and there's no implicit because your emotions are tuned to the explicit. But let's say for most people, I assume there's an implicit one.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that either, but yeah.
I do.
Okay, but
because I think that means only because I think that means for let's talk about myself because I don't want to talk about other people, but I think it's bad because if I have an implicit hierarchy of values, that would mean that there are certain things that I value but have not thought about or explicitly consciously thought about. Like I have certain feelings that I do not know why I feel that strongly about that thing. So I've like not identified the source of my emotions. That's why I think it might be bad if you have an implicit one.
Yeah, I think that's a good argument.
Okay.
I mean, I don't quite agree, but yeah, I think that's a good argument. You can build on that for sure. I think that's a valid way to think about it.
So what's wrong with it then?
I'm just
Am
saying
I just
implicit,
being too abstract?
I'm saying implicit, like I only think it'd be okay sometimes because if it's implicit, it might mean you just didn't have time to draw it all out necessarily.
Okay. I got it.
You could have the hierarchy, but didn't draw everything out, or it's still operating validly, but you just didn't draw it out yet.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So, this is complicated because then you have a lot of values in the hierarchy, and then the intensity of the motion is determined. How I don't. This is making me ask so many questions. Like, how is the intensity of an emotion determined then, and like, what does that indicate? Which I know this is going way off, but like, this is clearly some important rabbit hole. Like, what in terms of thinking about how you become very purpose driven.
I mean,
Like,
to begin with, it's you can't always explain what is responsible for the intensity. That could take a lot of thinking. I mean, what is responsible for the intensity? You could go further once to validate. Perhaps you can try to figure out why is it more intense or why is it less intense. I think that could be determined if you say subdivide the concepts. Perhaps you can make narrower instances and narrower subdivisions. That's one way to figure it out.
which
Like
concept to subdivide which one?
Like whatever concept you want to identify more precisely. If it were love, I mean, you might want to consider ways to subdivide it. Like you could say unrequited love. You could have reciprocated love. You could have like other conceptions of love that you might think of, and you could subdivide it to figure out why or what's responsible for these different intensities or kinds of intensities. I mean, you could separate them and try to isolate different characteristics
For
of kinds of
me,
love.
I actually, when I think of it just simply, like the intensity indicates the importance, like the subconsciously evaluated importance of something, right? And I guess that ties into, I don't know exactly how that feels. Maybe that's just importance in your hierarchy of values. Like that's actually like a pointer to where it ranks in your hierarchy of values.
Yeah, I think it could be, and with emotions, yeah, I think that's very likely.
Okay. And what about so she says if one wants to measure it, the intensity of a particular instance of love, one does so by reference to the hierarchy of values of the person experiencing it. A man may love a woman, yet may rate the neurotic satisfactions. What I'm confused about here is like, so there's love, which is like everything. Like if I love tea, but that's the same kind of like it's not the same kind of love as I love another person, but and
Yeah.
yet there's like they're like completely different things, and yet we can so I can measure my love of tea relative to my love of, I don't know, a partner.
Yeah.
That's that's strange. Okay.
I mean, it's strange, but it's just a really easy measurement because the hierarchy of values is so distinct. Like it's so clear that T versus a person, the person almost always wins out in
Well,
countless ways.
I actually don't know. I think that yeah, if you just say it like that, but what if you met someone and you were really into tea, not as work, but you just love drinking tea and you did love this person, but they're telling you you must stop drinking all tea if you want to. Like just to,
Oh,
do you know what I'm saying? In that case,
yeah.
suddenly it's not as easy anymore.
No, it's not as easy. But then you
But
would have to wonder: do you give a like to what extent do you allow a partner to do that to you? I mean, there's that too. Like do they destroy your hierarchy of values? They destroy all your other values. What good is a partner if everything else is
well, it's
absent?
there's destruction and there's compromise. I could probably
Sure.
think of a better scenario, but I
Yeah,
haven't, so I just
I
came
know
up
you
with that
mean.
one. But
Yeah,
that's I can see how if you're really clear on this concept and how you measure different things, and you're well practiced at doing so consciously, like wow, you'd be so much more purpose driven in a very clear way. But I don't know anyone who really, I don't know many people are. Let's go with that. So this
yeah.
is pretty cool.
That is a hard one because I mean that is a situation in many books. That's like the ultimate conflict. You love something, you love two things, and you don't think you can compromise. And sometimes people do want to compromise, sometimes they don't. If you do compromise, is that bad? I mean, to what extent do you compromise? Things like that. But it is probably like the ultimate question. How do you rate those two values? Like, that's a really difficult spot. And yeah, it could take months to figure it out.
And then you need to write a story about that happening and someone pulling out Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and developing a theory of teleology to make the decision.
That's actually a good idea for a story I've been writing. Like, there's this detective, and he's really into philosophy.
One sec. Sorry, one sec. I'll